13 gallons of gas, 4 hours in the air. Meanwhile, the Cessna, your flight school rents you, burns through 6 to 10 gallons an hour every single hour you're up there. One of these trainers was built to make the other one obsolete, and the numbers prove it before it even leaves the ground.
We also have what we call air brakes. They're really spoilers, automatic spoilers. We usually equip the aircraft so that it qualifies as a technically advanced aircraft.
If you've ever trained in a Cessna, you already know the feeling. You check the fuel gauge before every lesson, and it's already eating into your budget before you've even taken off. 6 to 10 gallons an hour doesn't sound like much on paper, but stack that across weeks of lessons, and suddenly flight training turns into one of the most expensive hobbies a person can pick. And that's not just a student problem either. Flight schools feel it too, every single day, across every aircraft on the ramp. More fuel burned means higher rental prices, which means fewer people can actually afford to start flying in the first place. For decades, this was just accepted as the cost of doing business. Nobody really questioned it. Think about what that actually means for someone just starting out. A young student walking into a flight school for the first time, looking at price sheets, trying to figure out if this dream is even affordable. For a lot of people, that price sheet is the moment they either commit or quietly walk away and never come back. Until Pipistrel looked at that exact problem and decided to build the opposite. The Alpha Trainer wasn't designed to be a slightly better Cessna. It was designed from the ground up to be affordable to acquire, and honestly, even cheaper to keep running. A composite airframe, built to be operated from virtually anywhere. Whether you're a first-time owner, running a small flight school, or trying to build out an entire training fleet. And that's where it gets interesting, because while every other trainer on the market kept getting more expensive to fly, one company quietly built the exact opposite. A plane that didn't just promise lower costs on a brochure, but was engineered, piece by piece, to actually deliver them. So here's the real question worth sitting with for a second. If this thing genuinely fixes the fuel cost problem that's been draining flight schools for decades, what exactly did they have to change under the surface to make that happen? Because that answer starts with the airframe itself. Here's the thing about training aircraft that most people never think about. They don't get flown by experienced pilots gently easing them onto the runway. They get flown by beginners, and beginners land hard, sometimes really hard, more often than any flight school would like to admit. So Pipistrel built the undercarriage around that exact reality. A new composite design, tough enough to absorb the kind of rough landings student pilots are known for, without turning every bad landing into an expensive repair bill. It's rated to handle a maximum payload of nearly 500 pounds, which is a lot of room to work with for an aircraft this size. And here's the part that quietly matters more than it sounds like it should. The Alpha Trainer comes in about 100 pounds lighter, empty, than most of its competitors. That's not a small detail. Less weight means better performance, better fuel efficiency, and honestly, just a more forgiving aircraft overall for someone who's still learning. Then there's the nose gear leg, shortened by 2 inches compared to earlier versions. It sounds tiny, almost forgettable, until you realize what it actually does. It lowers the sight picture over the nose, which means a student taxiing this aircraft can actually see where they're going, instead of guessing around a nose that's blocking half the runway in front of them. And they didn't sacrifice propeller clearance to make any of this work either. The Alpha Trainer uses a smaller 63-inch fixed pitch propeller, keeping everything balanced and safe. This part wasn't built for perfect pilots gliding in on a calm day. It was built for the ones who are still learning to land, bounce after bounce, lesson after lesson. So if it can survive rough landings, take the abuse of daily student training. and still come out lighter and more efficient than the competition. The obvious question becomes, what happens once this thing is actually cruising in the air? Because that's where the real headline number lives. This is the part that actually earns the title of this video, because on paper, 13.2 gallons sounds small. Almost too small for a real training aircraft. But here's where it gets insane, because that same tank gives you a range of about 380 miles, with reserves built in. Cruise speed sits just under 110 knots, and in a flight school setting, with multiple students rotating through the same aircraft every single day, the burn rate can drop as low as 2.5 gallons an hour. Sit with that number for a second. 2.5 gallons an hour in an aircraft that still cruises at real, usable speed. Do the math on that, and 13.2 gallons can stretch out to nearly 5 full hours of flight time. 5 hours. From a tank that would barely get some Cessnas through a single busy training day. That's not a small improvement. That's a completely different category of efficiency. And this isn't a lab number either, pulled from some perfect test flight in ideal conditions. This is a real-world figure, based on a flight school setting, with multiple students and instructors flying the same aircraft, day after day, lesson after lesson. And powering all of this is the Rotax 912, an 80-horsepower engine that's basically legendary across general aviation for being smooth and dependable. It's rated for 2,000 hours, or 15 years, between overhauls, which for a training aircraft flying nearly every single day is an enormous amount of trust to put in one engine. Unlike a Cessna locked into pre-sear, harder to find avgas at every stop, this engine platform leans into everyday, MOGAS-style efficiency, keeping costs low, mission after mission, lesson after lesson. 13 gallons sounds small at first, until you realize it can quietly outlast most flight lessons combined, without the pilot even thinking twice about the fuel gauge. So if the numbers really are this good, and the engine really is this reliable, here's the question that should be bothering you right about now. Why isn't every single flight school in the country already flying these instead of burning through Cessnas 1 gallon at a time? And that question doesn't stay unanswered for long, because the next thing Pipistrel changed wasn't hidden under the hood at all. It was staring right at every student every single time they climbed into the cockpit. Here's where it gets insane, because this next change is the kind most pilots never even think to ask for. Pipistrel didn't just tweak the wing on the Alpha Trainer, they redesigned it entirely, based on the already proven Virus SW. And that redesign did something almost nobody expects from a training aircraft. It got rid of air brakes completely. Think about that for a second. Air brakes are one more thing a student has to learn. One more lever to manage, one more thing to get wrong under pressure during a landing. And instead of teaching new pilots to fight that extra control, Pipistrel simply removed it from the equation. They didn't just make this aircraft cheaper to fly, they removed an entire control most student pilots struggle to learn in the first place. In its place came Flaperons, with a full 25 degrees of travel. That's a lot of range for landing control, and it shows the moment you watch this thing come down on a short runway. No dramatic wrestling with the controls, no last-second panic. just a smooth, confident glide down onto the pavement. The kind of landing that looks almost effortless on camera. And that glide is worth pausing on for a second, because next to a boxier, heavier Cessna, the Alpha Trainer just moves differently through the air. Lighter, cleaner, almost gliding rather than powering through the sky. Watching the in-flight footage, you can see exactly how stable this airframe feels, even with the throttle pulled all the way back. For a second, imagine you're the one in that cockpit, coming down on a short runway for the very first time. No extra lever to remember. No last-minute scramble to figure out air brakes while the ground is coming up fast. Just the Flaperons, doing exactly what they're supposed to do, and you actually focused on flying instead of fighting the controls. But the smart engineering doesn't stop at the wing. Pipistrel added extra heavy-duty seat fabric, built to survive years of students climbing in and out, day after day, lesson after lesson. And the wheel spats, they're removable, which sounds like a small detail until you actually need it. Because if a wheel gets punctured, and eventually one will, it's not a grounded aircraft and a lost day of revenue anymore. It's a 2-minute fix, and you're back in the air. All of this looks incredible on a spec sheet, and honestly, it should. But specs are easy to write down on paper. The real question is whether any of it actually holds up once real students, with real nerves, climb into a real cockpit and try to fly this thing themselves.
Alright, here's how we pre-flight the Pipistrel Alpha Trainer. Tail is number 1625 Tango. Over here at Sarasota, Florida, we're just prepping up for something.
This is the part where the spec sheet stops mattering, because down in Inverness, Florida, a flight school called Right Rudder Aviation found something almost nobody else had noticed. This exact airframe, the Pipistrel Alpha, is certified as a glider. And buried inside the regulations, that one detail quietly unlocks something huge. Because for a private pilot glider certificate, the requirement is only 10 hours of flight time. Not the months and months most people associate with getting a license. 10 hours. And Right Rudder built an entire program around that number, offering the complete private pilot glider certificate, everything included: the flight time, the instruction, the books, the exams, even the headset and logbook, for a total of $3,000. Sit with that for a second, because that number alone rewrites who actually gets to become a pilot. For a lot of people, the traditional route was never about desire. It was about whether they could afford it. And suddenly, here's a real path in, at a fraction of the usual cost. Instructors who came up through this exact program are already teaching other students in it themselves, sometimes just weeks after finishing their own check ride. One instructor described stepping into that role the very next day after passing, taking someone up for their first flight, before he'd even had time to process what he'd just achieved. But here's what nobody noticed at first. This isn't some watered-down shortcut either. Around 70% of the people who start with this private pilot glider certificate go on to convert into a full private pilot airplane license. 70%. That's the program working exactly the way it was designed to, quietly turning curious beginners into committed pilots. And it's not just numbers on a page either. Out on a real flight, you can watch an instructor walk a student through an actual in-flight engine shutdown, calmly running through the checklist, cutting the engine at altitude, then gliding it back down for landing like it's the most natural thing in the world. No panic, no fear, just quiet, practiced confidence, the kind that comes from actually understanding your aircraft instead of just fearing it. And then that same student sticks the landing on camera too, a nice controlled side slip lining it right up with the center line, Wheels touching down smooth, rolling out easy. It's the kind of moment that makes every spec sheet number from earlier in this video suddenly feel real, instead of just impressive on paper.
Other than the fact that, wow, I'm 14 and I can solo a glider. The feeling's just absolutely incredible.
And then there's the story that says everything about what this program can actually do. A 14-year-old girl flew a Pipistrel completely solo from the West Coast all the way to the East Coast, entirely on her own. 14. Other students have taken their own personal trips too, flying out for lunch on a whim, or heading over just to relax with friends on a Tuesday afternoon. So is this really just a cheaper way to learn to fly? Or is it quietly changing who actually gets to become a pilot in the first place? Because once a 14-year-old can do something like that, the old excuses about cost and time start to feel a lot less convincing. A gas-guzzling Cessna once felt like the only way in. Now a 13-gallon tank and a quiet glider loophole are getting people into the sky for a fraction of the cost. So here's the real question worth sitting with. Was flight training ever really this expensive because it had to be, or because nobody bothered trying to fix it until now?